I'm continuing my look through some of Garry Kasparov's best games. I know this is a very popular theme for many of you, and you can find some of my previous recordings in the playlist. But some of you said, well, hang on, what about Kasparov's great rival, Anatoly Karpov? Of course, he was world champion for 10 years, and somehow he's neglected. And I think that's a very good point. And after this, soon I'll start featuring some of Karpov's best games. There'll maybe be one more Kasparov game after this one, but yeah, I'm going to look at Karpov soon. But anyway, back to this game. It's a fairly random selection, but I'm going to look at the game between Vladimir Kramnik and Garry Kasparov, played in their match that was organised in Moscow in 2001. It was a year after their World Championship match, which of course Kramnik won. And this was a kind of Botvinnik Memorial tournament. Of course, both Kramnik and Kasparov were pupils under Mikhail Botvinnik. This was billed as a friendly match. Well, anything with Kasparov isn't that friendly. But I think the point was it was to make a distinction between this match and the World Championship match, which was for the title. And they first of all played 4 classical games. They all ended in draws. Then they played 6 rapid games, and they both won a game, and there were 4 draws, so everything even. And then they played 10 blitz games on the final day, which Kasparov won convincingly 6.5, 3.5, and this is one of those games. So Kramnik with the white pieces. Remember, this is a blitz game, and perhaps we shouldn't judge the standard of the chess too harshly. So here we go. It's a Queen's Gambit accepted. Black gives up his strong point on d5, but wants to hit out at white's centre. So this is a very theoretical position, a very standard position, leading to what's known as the isolated queen pawn position. So black has managed to hit out and isolate white's d pawn. Now, if lots of pieces were traded off the board, then this pawn could possibly turn out to be a weakness. But you can see in the middle game it does give white a certain space advantage, and you can often use that space to build up behind it, maybe with moves like queen d3 and dropping the bishop back sometimes to c2 to attack along this diagonal. You can also sometimes use the e5 square as an outpost, and sometimes you can even advance that pawn, which unleashes the power of, well, very often this bishop. So it's an interesting position. It's quite dynamic for both sides. It's an unbalanced position. Now, there are many ways that white can play this. a3 covers that square, so then queen d3 becomes more plausible. h4 has been played. That's a very interesting move. Sometimes it advances up the board, sometimes is used to protect the g5 square. But here Kramnik developed his bishop to f4. It's certainly not a bad development for the bishop, controlling squares on the queen side. Knight a5 from Kasparov. Of course, he would love to gain the 2 bishops. And here Kramnik played a very aggressive move. He pushed forward with d5. Bishop c2 would be the normal move here, but then it has been discovered. In fact, both Kramnik and Kasparov had played this position with white before, but it's been discovered that actually black was doing okay in this position. Anyway, Kramnik broke straight away with d5. Now, if black were to exchange here, then I think we can see how powerful it can be when white gets this move in successfully. This is a tremendous piece on d5, and these bishops are wonderful. So this bishop on d5 in particular, looking at b7 and f7. The knight on a5 is somewhat out of play. This rook is looking good here. It's simply quite difficult for black to develop this bishop successfully. This will be very good for white. So after d5, Kasparov took off the bishop. That looks normal. But it does mean that you can see how fluently white is developing here, how harmoniously his pieces work together. The rook is about to come to d1, and what a beautiful square that would be. So, for example, after pawn takes pawn, then rook here. Well, black might well be okay here, but this is not an easy position for black to play. You can see white's pieces look tremendous here. Particularly in a blitz game, that would be hard to defend. But Kasparov, I suspect Kasparov was still in his opening preparation. He took the knight, and this is the best move. And now, if white captures here, then black should be fine. The bishop is going to come to e6. Yeah, sometimes even g4 or f5, but e6 looks like the right square. Black should be all right there. So Kramnik played rook to d1. This looks like the most challenging move for black, because you can see that black still has this problem, which is so typical of queen's gambit positions, where he can't develop that queen's bishop. Well, not easily anyway, not to a good square. Now, Kasparov here kind of cuts the Gordian knot. He solves the problem of this pin just by giving up his queen. Now, this has been played before, but it's still quite a daring continuation from black. And you give up your queen. Now, if you look at this position on a strict numerical basis, then black has rook and bishop and pawn for the queen, so it's about equal. But there is a danger here for black, that if the queen gets targets, then that queen can be very strong. So it's a double-edged position. Black, at the moment, black has to be more careful than white. So rook d1. Here's an example of what can go badly wrong for black. This was played in a game in 2005. What happens if black takes? Well, let's push that knight back. The knight comes in. Black is not yet developed. The knight is going to come in here. And in this position, black can hardly move. And in fact, black resigned here. The bishop is on priest. The queen is coming in here. Okay, it wasn't too early to resign. So black has to be careful. I think particularly in a blitz game where you don't have much time to sort of think through your defence, this is not easy for black. Kasparov plays a very good move at knight d5. In fact, this had been played before in a game between Gelfand and Shirov, which went like this. They traded here. The game went like this. And in this position, the players, Gelfand and Shirov, actually agreed a draw. It's a dynamic balance. The rook works very well with the bishops and can attack these pawns. And this knight really doesn't have too much to do, so I think a draw is about right there. But Kramnik played in a more enterprising way, keeping the tension in the position. And I don't blame him, because at first glance this looks extremely dangerous, because Kasparov has yet to develop his queen's bishop. This knight looks rather threatening. But let's see what happened. Bishop f6. The knight is hit. The knight came back to c4, looking at that b6 square, and that could be quite nasty. Excellent defence from Kasparov. Now maybe Kramnik should trade here and play the knight in, but you see every time he trades, that allows the bishop out, and black should be fine there. There are no real weaknesses in his position. Kramnik wanted more. He tried to keep black bottled up, so he's playing in quite an enterprising way. But actually, Kasparov succeeded in developing his pieces, and now if it's probably too late for white to trade, if he trades, then this is rather awkward. That pin is rather nasty. And don't forget, there are back rank problems here. So in combination with the pin, that's rather dangerous for white. So Kramnik played knight e4, but in taking the knight away from the knight on d5, that's dangerous because now that knight on d5 really shields black's pieces and position. I mean, that's rock solid here, supported by the pawn. Okay, the bishop came back, so Kasparov keeping the two bishops. They don't look very impressive at the moment, but let's see what happens to those bishops. So comes out, but it goes back in. But that's okay because that's potentially a weak point, and the bishop protects that one. It also gets the bishop is actually not badly placed on e8 because it's out of the way of the rooks. The rooks are connected. It's better than on c8. The bishop's looking pretty good on e8 actually, defending a weakness and ready to come out later. Okay, let's see what happened. So Kasparov started to break out, so he doesn't need to bother protecting this pawn any longer on b7. So the rook activates. Kramnik's fishing around on the king side, but actually he can't really strengthen his attack here. There's nothing going on. Black is rock solid. The queen needs targets, and the queen just doesn't have any targets. So king h1 now, remember it's a blitz game, but you know, you can forgive a move like this, but this is indicative of the fact that white really doesn't have a plan here. And Kasparov played a5, and he's able to build up at leisure. So these pawn moves just improve the position of black's pawns on the queen side, cramping these pawns. So if one of these white pawns does disappear, then the pawns on b5 and a4 will be very well placed. It's just a slight improvement of black's position, but really Kasparov is showing that white can do nothing. So Kramnik rearranges his knights, but it doesn't achieve anything actually. So the knight drops back and the rooks are exchanged. Normally the queen likes to get rid of a pair of rooks in this kind of position, but actually now the way is clear for that rook to come down the board, and now the counter-attack begins. That bishop comes to this superb diagonal, pinning knight and queen and king, really unpleasant. And now, okay, that closes the diagonal to the king, but now bishop number 2 emerges. Look at these pieces. Those bishops are raking across the board. Of course, if that knight moves, then rook h1 is going to be checkmate. Kramnik is already lost in this position, and rook d3 is an excellent move. Of course, if that rook is captured, the queen goes, and black is a whole piece up. So after rook d3, well, actually, white is lost. And here, after bishop takes knight, Kramnik resigned. That's just too many pieces. I think something else is going to be lost very soon. You can imagine a check and taking on e5, excuse me, and then taking on g4. It's losing material, losing the king. It's just dreadful. Really impressive blitz game from Kasparov. Fantastic the way he managed to contain white's initiative and then go on the counter-attack himself. So Kasparov won that blitz match on the final day, 6.5, 3.5, and afterwards claimed the right to a rematch against Kramnik. He felt that he had a moral right to a rematch. But Kramnik didn't give in, and Kramnik went through the qualification process. Well, at least Kramnik's eventual challenger did. But Kasparov, I'm afraid, was frustrated in his attempts to get a rematch, and, well, finally he retired in 2005. So there we go. I'm going to give one more Kasparov game after this, and then I'll move on to Karpov. Thanks very much for watching.